Once upon a time, a man named Charles lived in a busy town. He had a shoemaking workshop that supplied shoes to the whole town. Shopkeepers liked his shoes because customers loved them. Charles's workers were skilled, hardworking, and honest. They had worked for him for many years. Charles's wife passed away when their baby girl, Mealy, was born. Now, Mealy was studied in grade 3. Charles's brother, John, lived with him, along with his wife, Emma, and their son, Louis. Louis and Mealy were the same age and studied in the same grade. They loved each other and were like best friends. Louis and Mealy spent their days playing and studying. When it was time for school projects, they sat side by side, working as a team. Charles loved his brother and nephew very much. He always treated them like his own family and shared everything with them. But John and Emma were greedy. They didn't truly care for Charles or Mealy. They only acted kind and caring to stay in his good books. Behind his back, they often talked about how to take more from him. They pretended to love them only to benefit from Charles's money. They wanted to enjoy the comfortable life he provided. One morning, Emma got up early and went into the kitchen to prepare breakfast. She made tea, scrambled eggs, sweet porridge, and toasted bread. While she was busy, Charles and John woke up, took a bath, and got dressed. In a little while, Mealy and Louis also got up, freshened up, and put on their uniforms. On the table, Emma had arranged scrambled eggs, sweet porridge, milk glasses, buttered toast with jam and honey, and fresh orange juice. Mealy looked at her glass of orange juice and said,
"I don't want orange juice."
Emma smiled and said,
"Oh, my dear. I will just make pomegranate juice for you. I hope you will like it."
Mealy smiled and replied,
"Oh, my dear aunt. You are so sweet."
Charles smiled and said,
"You really love Mealy so much."
Emma replied,
"You know, Mealy is like my own kid."
She got up and went to the kitchen, made the juice, and returned with a glass of juice, saying,
"Take this, my sweetheart."
After breakfast, Louis hurried to his room to grab his bag.
"Mealy! Where are you? We are getting late,"
he called as he rushed to her room. Inside, he found Mealy looking frantically under the desk.
"What's wrong?"
Louis asked.
Oh no. My math notebook is missing.
Mealy said, her face filled with worry. Louis frowned.
But it's almost school time.
Louis started looking around, and after a few moments, he spotted the notebook under the bed.
Mealy, how did this get here?
He asked. Mealy grabbed it, laughing.
I think it went under the bed last night to hide.
Louis laughed.
Well, let's try to keep it on the desk next time.
They both rushed to the door, shouting,
Goodbye, Mom!
Goodbye, Aunt.
There was a woman, Elizabeth, who lived in the town. She was a widow. Her husband had passed away 2 years ago. She had a 3-year-old son, Mike. Elizabeth and her late husband used to make clay toys and sell them at the shops. Now, Elizabeth continued making the toys and selling them. But often half of them were rejected. One morning, after breakfast and feeding Mike, Elizabeth placed the toys in a handcart and wheeled it to the shop. The shopkeeper looked at the toys and said,
I will just take these.
He pointed to a few toys and added,
I will give you $1 for each.
Elizabeth sighed but smiled and nodded.
All right. I agree.
She received the payment, tucked it into her pocket, and returned home with Mike after the grocery shopping. Charles often took Mealy and Louis to his workshop. One time, when they were there, John was walking around and checking on the workers.
Keep the stitching straight,
John said, pointing at a worker's shoe in progress. The kids started talking to the workers. Louis asked,
How many shoes can you make in one day?
Charles called a helper.
Go get 2 burgers and fries for the kids.
He said, handing him some money. Charles walked over to the accountant's desk.
How's the payment for last month's delivery?
Charles asked. The accountant replied,
We are just waiting on one shop's payment.
Charles nodded.
We can't afford delays.
Soon, the food arrived, and Louis said,
Thank you, Uncle.
While eating, they watched the workers and asked funny questions. Louis asked,
Can you make a shoe big enough for an elephant?
John laughed slightly but then turned serious.
You kids shouldn't distract the workers too much.
He said. Charles smiled.
Let them enjoy. John. They are just curious.
John nodded but continued keeping a close eye on the workers. One night, John brought a doll for Mealy. Louis asked,
But where's my toy car?
John replied,
Maybe someday.
Mealy laughed and said,
You know, Louis, Uncle loves me more.
Charles smiled and said,
John, you should take a toy car for our prince too.
Then Charles turned to Louis.
I promise. I will get you a toy car.
Emma came into the lounge with a tray of tea, cookies and cupcakes, etc.
Now, enjoy your tea and snacks, everyone,
she said with a smile. One day, while at the workshop, Charles suddenly collapsed from a heart attack and was rushed to the hospital. Mealy cried terribly, and Louis felt sad. After a few days, Charles came home, but he was very weak. John and Emma discussed quietly, and Emma said,
You should take over the business now.
John nodded. While Charles was resting in bed, he heard that John had fired the accountant.
But why?
Charles asked weakly. John replied,
Brother. He was stealing from us. I checked the records, and it's all clear now. Don't worry. I will handle everything.
Charles noticed his medicine was finished. He told John,
Could you get my medicines tomorrow?
The next evening, John came back with ice cream. When Charles asked about the medicine, John said,
Oops. I forgot, brother. I will get it tomorrow.
After that, it became a routine. John kept forgetting to buy the medicine. A few months later, Charles suffered a severe heart attack and passed away. Mealy was heartbroken, but Emma hugged her tightly. John, standing nearby, said,
Patience, my dear.
After the funeral, one evening at dinner, Mealy sat quietly with them. Emma and John spoke to Louis. They ignored Mealy completely, and her heart sank with sadness. After that, Mealy stopped sitting with them at the dining table and ate alone in the kitchen. One night, when she went to get food, she found only bread on the counter. The other food Aunt Emma had taken to her room. With teary eyes, Mealy made herself some tea and ate the bread alone. Mealy began working around the house every day after school, due to Aunt's order. Louis, upset by the unfairness, protested, "Mom,
This isn't right.
John scolded him harshly. Mealy accidentally spilled tea on Emma's favorite tablecloth. Emma got a reason to beat Mealy and then threw her out of the house. Mealy cried as she knocked on the door, saying,
Sorry. Please let me in.
Louis was crying too. But John dragged him into his room, trying to calm him down. Mealy walked through the town, feeling cold and hungry. Anne knocked on doors, but nobody answered. Shivering, she came to a house and knocked. Elizabeth opened the door. Mealy said,
I'm so hungry.
Elizabeth felt sorry for her and said,
Come in, child.
She made tea and served it with bread. Mealy said,
My father is dead. And my uncle and aunt threw me out.
Elizabeth said,
Don't be sad. Now I am your mother.
Elizabeth took her admission in school. After school, Mealy took care of Mike, while Elizabeth made toys. Mealy said,
I want to help you make toys.
But Elizabeth refused gently. A year later, there was a knock at the door. Mealy opened it and was shocked to see Uncle John, Aunt Emma, and Louis. Louis hugged her, crying. Uncle John said,
I'm very sorry. Mealy.
Aunt Emma added,
I treated you badly out of greed. But now the business is ended due to John's mistakes.
John pleaded.
Please come home.
Mealy looked at Elizabeth, who said,
He is your uncle. You can go with him. But this is still your home.
Mealy hugged Elizabeth tightly, both of them crying. Mike said,
Don't go. Sis.
Elizabeth gently reassured him.
Don't worry. Mealy will come to meet us.
Mealy and Louis were both happy.